Welcome to the deep dive. Well, here we are. It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has. We've covered so much ground.
From the dusty streets of Athens right through to the massive structure of the Roman Empire, we've looked at trials, punishments, the very beginnings of legal science as we understand it.
It's been a deep immersion, definitely, into how societies tried to manage conflict, how they govern themselves.
And now, for this final deep dive in the series, we want to step back a bit, take a wider view.
Exactly. We're trying to trace what you called that immense and enduring echo of classical law.
Yeah.
What actually survived, what concepts, what structures, what ways of thinking are still with us today, shaping our own legal world.
It's fascinating because we use legal terms all the time. Things like contract, trust, even the basic idea that a court case is better than a blood feud. We don't always stop to think these have ancient roots.
Roots in, actual feuds, political fights, the needs of empire building.
So today, we're pulling together those two huge traditions. Athens first, that focus on philosophy, justice, citizens getting involved.
And then Rome. Their absolute genius for system building, for creating legal codes that could adapt and last.
These two gave us different things, didn't
Yeah.
they? But both absolutely vital.
Totally. Athens gives us the why, maybe, the philosophical language, the drive to figure out what's truly just.
While Rome gave us the how.
Precisely. The operational side, the structure, the methods, the tools that allowed law to run an empire, and crucially, formed the bedrock for civil law systems across Europe and beyond. Still shaping things today.
Okay, let's start digging into that legacy. Athens first.
Right, Athens. Now, when we think of Athenian democracy, it's easy to romanticize it, and it was special. George Grote, the historian, he pointed out it created this really intense, positive attachment, a bond between citizens you just didn't see in other Greek cities ruled by tyrants or small groups.
A common bond. But it wasn't just about warm feelings and civic pride, was it? That attachment, that citizenship, it came with a pretty heavy price tag.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't optional participation. Michael Christ's work highlights this citizenship wasn't just freedoms, it was packed with compulsory orders and obligations.
Obligations like what, specifically?
Well, mandatory military service, for one, serving on those huge citizen juries. We've talked about hundreds, sometimes thousands of people. And the liturgies.
Ah, yes, the liturgies, where the wealthy citizens basically had to foot the bill for public services.
Exactly. Like paying to equip a warship or funding a play at the big festivals. It was a serious financial burden and not exactly voluntary.
So if people were being forced into these duties and maybe trying to get out of them, the legal system must have played a big role in enforcement.
It had to. The state needed mechanisms to control evasion, to make sure people fulfilled these duties. And the main mechanism, often it was the popular courts.
The courts, again. So they weren't just settling arguments, they were enforcing civic duty.
And political accountability. They were the absolute center stage for much of public life.
Which makes someone like Cleon. His career path makes more sense then. You mentioned he was active in the law courts before he got into military command.
That's right. Thucydides paints him as pretty sharp, very determined. But Bury notes his main road to political power wasn't the battlefield initially. It was the courtroom. He made his name prosecuting generals, scrutinizing officials, battling rivals in front of the assembly and the courts.
So mastering the legal game was his way into politics and command.
It really underscores how intertwined law and politics were in Athens. The legal system was a political tool.
Okay, but how did that square with the philosophical side? The big ideas about justice we get from people like Plato, weren't they aiming higher than just political point scoring?
Well, that's the tension, isn't it? Plato, especially in works like the Laws, he wrestled with this. The lines between ethics and politics were, well, they were still kind of blurry back then.
Blurry?
For Plato, law wasn't just about stopping bad behavior. It was meant to be prescriptive, a moral guide. Its job was to actively lead citizens toward all virtue. That's a really high bar he sets for law. It's the foundation, really, for the whole Western idea that law should serve some kind of higher moral purpose.
A moral guide. But practically speaking, the law first had to deal with something much more basic, didn't it? Like stopping people from killing each other in revenge cycles. The blood feud.
Exactly. Before law could teach virtue, it had to replace vengeance. That shift from the oikos, the household, the family being the source of justice, to the city-state taking over, That's the fundamental revolution.
And we see this acted out literally in Greek tragedy.
We do. The prime example has got to be Aeschylus's Oresteia.
Right. Walk us through why that's so crucial for understanding this legal shift.
Okay, so in the Oresteia, you have this inescapable cycle of violence within a family. Agamemnon sacrifices his daughter, returns from Troy, gets murdered by his wife Clytemnestra.
Who is then killed by their son, Orestes, to avenge his father.
Right. It's matricide, driven by the demands of blood, guilt, and revenge. And the point is, this cycle just feeds on itself. It consumes the family, the oikos, from the inside out. There's no internal resolution possible.
So it needs something external.
Precisely. Goldhill argues that the genius of the play is showing that this oikos-based conflict has to be resolved outside the family. It takes the goddess Athena stepping in, establishing a formal court, the Areopagus, to put Orestes on trial. The family feud is literally moved into the city's framework.
The Palacus contains the oikos.
Yes, the city and its institutions, its courts, become the only way to stop that endless cycle of internal vengeance. It's a landmark moment, shifting justice from private hands to a public civic structure.
A huge step for civilization. But it sounds like almost as soon as the Athenians set up this civic structure, they started using it to carry on the feuding, just in a different way.
That's the paradox, and it's fascinating. David Cullen talks about the agonistic ethos in Athens, this deeply ingrained competitive spirit, this drive for conflict and one-upmanship. It's soaked into everything.
Including the legal system.
Especially the legal system. Instead of being this neutral space for resolving disputes, the courts often became just another arena for playing out social and political rivalries. A tool to attack enemies, enhance your own status, continue the fight.
So litigation as feud 2.0.
You could put it that way, yeah. Think about Demosthenes again. So much of his public life was just a series of relentless legal battles against his personal and political enemies, like Aeschines or Medias.
It wasn't just about the specific legal issue then.
Often, no. For the elite, filing a lawsuit was a performance. It was an aggressive move to score points, damage a rival's reputation, gain an edge in the assembly. It really was, as you said, conflict continued by other means.
And this focus on rivalry, reputation, public standing, that leads us straight to hubris, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Hubris is such a key concept because it shows just how tightly Athenian law was bound up with their social code, the code of honor and shame. We translate hubris now as just arrogance or pride, but legally, in Athens, it was a serious crime.
A crime covering what kinds of acts?
It covered any action done with the specific intention of shaming or insulting someone else, degrading their status, essentially.
So it wasn't limited to physical violence, like assault?
No, not at all. While serious physical acts like rape definitely fell under hubris, it could also include nonviolent acts. Things that insulted someone's sexual honor, seriously damaged a family's public standing. Even public ridicule of a citizen could potentially be framed as hubris.
The key was the intent to dishonor.
Exactly. The law cared about the deliberate infliction of deep dishonor by the perpetrator. It was about protecting social standing as much as physical safety.
Which means the punishments had to reflect that. They needed to inflict dishonor back onto the offender.
That seems to be the logic. The legal system often aimed for profound public dishonor, especially in cases touching on social rules. Take adultery, for instance. Virginia Hunter's work shows the law allowed the wronged husband to publicly humiliate the adulterous woman in pretty much any way short of actually killing or maiming her.
Wow, so the goal wasn't just punishment, it was social annihilation.
Pretty much. The idea was to inflict such shame that her life within the community became, quote, not worth living. It powerfully reinforced the absolute importance of family honor, especially female sexual honor, for the whole community's stability.
It's striking, isn't it? This legal system that Plato hoped would lead people to all virtue. But in practice, it was also this fierce battleground for reputation, where shame was a major currency and a legal tool.
A real duality. They gave us the ideal of citizens involved in justice, the philosophical quest, but also a clear view of how easily legal structures can be shaped, maybe even warped, by that human drive for competition and status.
Okay, so Athens gives us the philosophy, the citizen ideal, but also the potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
Rome, if Athens is the why, Rome is the how, you said, the organizational machine.
Right. Rome gave us the framework, the methodology that could actually run an empire and survive political chaos. But interestingly, this incredibly complex system grew from the same root as Athens, the absolute primacy of kinship.
That's Sir Henry Maine's point, isn't it? That all ancient law, Rome included, started out fundamentally tribal.
Maine's insight was crucial. He argued that early societies basically couldn't imagine political organization except through blood ties. You had the family, then the house or gens, then the tribe, and finally the commonwealth or state, all built on perceived kinship.
So the idea of organizing a state based on, say, where people lived, local geography, that was a massive mental leap later on.
A radical departure, Maine called it. Before that, it was all about bloodlines, real or imagined ancestors.
And within that kinship structure, things like contract and property law start to emerge. You mentioned contract is maybe Rome's biggest legal export?
Arguably, yes, the idea of a legally binding agreement. The early Roman term for it was nexum.
Nexum, what does that mean?
It literally means a bond or a chain, which perfectly captures the idea you are legally bound, chained by the agreement. That core concept echoed through all of Roman legal history and flowed directly into modern civil law.
And the early way of making a nexum, it involved a physical ritual, something with copper and scales.
Yes, that early definition is fascinating because it shows the transition from ritual to abstraction. Jurists define nexum as every transaction with the copper in the balance. This points to the emancipation ceremony.
Emancipation.
It was an ancient, formal ritual needed to transfer certain kinds of important property, or to make a contract binding in the really early days. It required witnesses 5 Roman citizens, someone holding bronze scales, the liberpens, and the parties themselves. They'd strike the scales with a piece of copper.
Like sealing the deal physically.
Exactly. It was a very solemn, public, physical act. That physicality reinforced the seriousness and the binding nature of the deal in archaic Rome, long before everything was just written down.
Sounds incredibly rigid, especially compared to how we handle property today. Did that same rigidity apply to inheritance, to wills?
Very much so. Our modern idea of a will, where you can just decide to leave your property to anyone, ignoring your family if you want, that's actually quite recent. Maine points out it's probably not older than the later Middle Ages.
Really? So in early Rome,
In early Rome, property was deeply tied to the family, the gens. The law heavily restricted how you could pass it down. The priority was preserving the family unit and its assets. You couldn't just freely divert property away from your kin.
it's amazing that a society starting with such strict, ritual-bound, family-focused rules could then build a legal system flexible enough to govern a vast, diverse empire. How did they manage that leap? It must have required a different way of thinking about law.
It absolutely did. And this is where you see the real genius of the Roman jurists. It's a very different mindset from, say, traditional English common law.
How so? We tend to focus on precedent, right? Finding a past case that fits the current one.
Exactly. Case law is king in the common law tradition. You hunt for that perfect precedent. But Roman jurists, well, they didn't really have a system of binding precedent from appellate courts in the same way. There wasn't that centralized bench handing down rulings that everyone had to follow.
So what did they do when a new legal problem came up?
Their training pushed them in a different direction. Instead of looking for one specific past case, they tended to analyze whole classes of hypothetical situations. They thought more abstractly. They developed broad legal principles first.
Principles that could then be applied to lots of different specific cases.
Precisely. It was a more deductive approach. Figure out the underlying rule, the principle, and then you can apply it flexibly to new facts, new situations, new cultures across the empire. That systematic, principle-based thinking is what made Roman law so adaptable and exportable.
They sound more like legal architects than just lawyers arguing cases. And to handle the friction between the old strict laws and the new realities of running an empire, they came up with a clever tool: legal fiction.
Legal fictions. They were absolutely essential. The oil in the Roman legal engine, you might say. And it wasn't about telling lies in court. It was a recognized technique.
A technique for what?
For updating the law, making it work for new situations, without having to explicitly say, okay, that revered ancient law from the 12 tables, we're throwing it out. It allowed for evolution while maintaining an appearance of continuity.
Okay, how did it work? Give me an example.
A classic one involves foreigners, peregrini. Roman civil law, strictly speaking, only applied to Roman citizens. But the empire was full of non-citizens who needed access to the legal system for trade, disputes, etc.
Right, practical problem.
So the jurists used a fiction. If a foreigner needed to sue or be sued under rules that normally only applied to citizens, the praetor's formula, the instructions to the judge, would essentially say, okay, judge, for the purposes of this case, just pretend this foreigner is a Roman citizen. Treat him as if he were a citizen.
So you just assume the necessary condition is met, even though it isn't?
Exactly. It allowed them, as Clifford Ando puts it, to honor the principles articulated in earlier legislation. They weren't formally changing the old rule about citizenship, but they were changing how the law actually worked in practice to meet the empire's needs.
Oh.
It let the law adapt without messy, explicit repeals.
That's incredibly pragmatic, almost like a legal loophole generator. But even with all this imperial machinery and clever juristic techniques, the idea persisted that law, lex, originally came from the people, didn't it?
That foundational idea was important, yes, especially for legitimacy. Jurists needed a theory for where the emperor's lawmaking power ultimately came from. The classic definition from the late Republican jurist Attes Capito, preserved in Justinian's Digest centuries later, defined lex as a general command of the populace, or plebs the people or the commoners, when a magistrate puts a question to it.
So even under the emperors, when the popular assemblies were basically rubber stamps, they kept this language that traced sovereignty back to the citizens.
They did. It reinforced that fundamental, if increasingly theoretical principle, that the right to make binding rules originated with the community itself.
But the reality for citizens under the empire, especially in the courts, that theoretical equality started to break down quite badly, didn't it? Particularly in criminal justice. Status became everything.
It really did. This is where you see a major and frankly chilling shift from Republican ideals. Historically, the Republic was very hesitant to execute citizens, especially high-status ones. That penalty, capite puniri, was seen as extreme for the upper orders.
You mentioned Caesar using this.
Right, during the debates about the Catiline conspirators. When Cato the Younger argued for executing them, Caesar accused his faction of proposing a new kind of penalty, precisely because executing senators and nobles without a full trial and appeal was traditionally seen as radical, almost unacceptable.
But under the empire, this hesitation disappeared, and they actually formalized inequality and punishment.
They did. A stark legal distinction emerged between the honestiores, the more honorable people, like senators, knights, wealthy landowners, local officials, and the humiliores, the lower orders, the masses.
And your status determined how you were punished for the same crime.
Absolutely. If an honestior committed a capital crime, they might still be executed, but usually by beheading, considered a relatively quick and honorable death. A humilior, convicted of the same offense, could face much crueler fates, being sent to the mines, which was often a death sentence itself, being branded, or being thrown to wild beasts in the arena at bestias.
So emperors like Claudius or Domitian might consciously decide to spare an honestior from a brutal punishment that they'd readily inflict on someone from the lower classes. That's discrimination written into the law.
It's systemic, institutionalized inequality based purely on social standing and wealth. And this erosion of citizen equality hit hardest on what was perhaps the most sacred right of a Roman citizen, the gemidius provocationis.
The right of appeal. To appeal a magistrate's death sentence to the people, or later, directly to the emperor.
Yes, that was the ultimate check in the Republic against arbitrary power by officials. But under the empire, especially out in the provinces, this fundamental right started to fray.
Why? What happened?
Practicalities, mainly. As the empire expanded, millions of provincials gained Roman citizenship. The idea of every single capital case involving a citizen potentially being appealed all the way back to Rome, it just became unworkable, a logistical nightmare.
So efficiency trumped the principle of the right to appeal.
In many cases, yes. Scholars like Sherwin-White and Garnsey show that provincial governors were given increasing authority to handle capital cases involving citizens on the spot. They might have special jurisdiction, cognitio extra ordinem for certain crimes.
Meaning they could try and sentence citizens without the appeal going to Rome?
Effectively, yes. While the right of provocatio might still have existed on paper, in practice, governors could often bypass it or simply ignore it due to these practical necessities. We have examples where citizens' appeals were disregarded and they were executed provincially. The sheer scale of the empire meant that the old Republican safeguards, designed for a city-state, were inevitably weakened or sidelined. The demands of imperial administration began to override traditional rights.
The machine needed to run smoothly, even if it meant crushing some individual rights along the way.
So we've seen Athens and Rome, their ideals, their systems, their flaws. Now let's look at the echo today. What are the core concepts that really lasted that still resonate, starting back with Greece?
Okay, the Greek legacy. You said it wasn't so much institutional, but more intellectual.
I think so. We don't have giant Athenian juries anymore, thankfully, perhaps. But what we absolutely inherited is that philosophical drive. The relentless questioning about justice, about the nature of law itself, that's the enduring gift of Socrates.
The Socratic method. Keep asking why.
Exactly. The idea that you can't just accept law as tradition or authority. You have to examine it, define your terms rigorously, justify it with reason. Think of Plato's Euthyphro, where Socrates just ties Euthyphro in knots, trying to get a clear definition of holiness. That insistence on clarity, on rational justification, that's the bedrock of critical legal thinking.
And connecting that back to Athenian politics, there's also that strong, maybe even harder sense of accountability for leaders that we inherited.
Oh, definitely. The Athenians expected absolute accountability, particularly when things went wrong in military or political affairs. It wasn't just rhetoric.
You mean the practice of actually prosecuting generals who failed?
Yes. It sounds brutal to us, but they did it. Take Lysicles, a general after the disastrous Battle of Chaeronea. He survived the battle, got back to Athens, and was promptly put on trial and executed for the failure.
Wow, that certainly sends a message about responsibility.
It ingrained this powerful idea. If you hold public office, if you wield the state's power and enjoy the citizens' trust, you bear the ultimate responsibility for the outcome, especially for failure. That's a demanding standard of civic accountability.
A standard maybe we don't always meet today. Okay, let's turn to the Roman legacy. This seems more direct, more institutional, especially in continental Europe.
It is, in many ways. The most fundamental Roman gift is arguably the idea of the rule of law itself, as a structural necessity for society. Cicero really articulated this. He argued that justice rests on feeds.
Fees, meaning trust.
Trust, reliability, constancy, honesty, and agreements. Cicero believed a state, a commonwealth, could only function if citizens generally honored their promises, followed the laws, kept their word.
Sounds simple, but making that work across millions of people.
It requires something crucial, a willingness to sometimes put the long-term public good ahead of your immediate private interest. That's the Roman concept of the social contract, really. Society holds together because people collectively agree to abide by the rules, even when it's inconvenient or costly for them personally. That principle underlies all stable legal systems today: commercial law, constitutional law, everything.
But the Romans also gave us a terrifying object lesson in what happens when that trust collapses, when the legal forms are deliberately smashed.
Absolutely. The dictatorship of Sulla is the ultimate nightmare scenario. He didn't just ignore a few laws. He systematically dismantled the core protections of Roman citizenship.
Suspending the right of appeal, the provocatio, and that idea of collegiate equality where magistrates could check each other.
Gone. Sulla wielded absolute, unchecked power. Mommsen's description is chilling. He suspended every legal hearing.
And the prescriptions. Mass executions without trial.
It was formalized terror. Sulla published lists of names, his political enemies, critics, anyone he wanted gone. And anyone on that list could be killed on sight, their property confiscated. No trial, no defense, just elimination by public announcement.
It's the law used not for justice, but purely as an instrument of death.
It's the starkest possible proof, as Mommsen saw it, that exceptional power, once freed from all legal restraint, becomes monstrous. It shows how law, designed to protect, can be twisted into the most efficient tool of oppression when its fundamental safeguards are removed.
A chilling warning. And yet, despite Sulla, despite the later emperors making status-defying punishment, the Roman method somehow survived all that.
That's the incredible part. The jurist's commitment to system, to precise language, to detailed analysis, to organizing legal principles, that intellectual tradition proved incredibly resilient. It outlasted the Republic, outlasted the Western Empire.
So the debris, as you called it earlier, the written laws, the juristic commentaries, the systematic thinking, it was all still there.
It was there, preserved in texts like Justinian's Code in the East. And centuries later, in medieval Italy, scholars rediscovered this vast body of sophisticated legal thought. They studied it, rationalized it, adapted it.
And that became the foundation for modern civil law.
Exactly. The rediscovery of Roman law in places like Bologna fundamentally shaped the legal development of continental Europe. It led directly to things like the Napoleonic Code, which then influenced legal systems across the globe.
It's an amazing paradox. A legal system born in kinship rules, capable of brutal status-based punishments and dictatorial terror, ultimately provides the blueprint for rational, systematic, impartial law for much of the modern world. #tag outro.
So as we wrap this up, this whole series really, that dual legacy seems clear. Athens gives us the big questions, the ideals, citizen engagement, the philosophical search for what justice is.
While Rome gives us the practical tools, the methodology, the systematic language, the institutional structures you need to actually run a complex society, whether it's a city or an empire.
And their struggles feel surprisingly modern, don't they? The fight against tyranny you mentioned, Pisistratus grabbing power in Athens with his 50 bodyguards, despite Solon warning everyone.
Right, echoes of debates about executive power today.
Or the Romans struggle to apply consistent law across diverse provinces, echoes of challenges in international law and managing large multicultural states. Their problems haven't entirely gone away.
And that core tension we saw again and again, the constant push and pull between law and liberty, between the state's power and the citizens' rights, that feels like their most profound and maybe most unsettling inheritance.
It is, because their history demonstrates so clearly that law can be our greatest shield, the thing that lifts us above mere vengeance.
Mm.
But it can also be the most effective weapon of tyranny when it's captured or corrupted.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Something to maybe chew on, drawing from that Athenian agonistic spirit we discussed.
If we acknowledge that even in ancient Athens, someone like Demosthenes might have used the courts, the language of justice, primarily as a weapon in his personal and political battles.
Just continuing the feud, essentially.
Right. If legal systems, even noble ones, are inevitably shaped by underlying human conflict and competition, what does that imply about our own legal systems today? How often, perhaps, is the formal language of justice simply a more sophisticated veneer for those same ancient drives, political struggle, personal ambition, the continuation of feud?
The law, then, is never just a neutral set of rules floating above us. It's an arena, reflecting and sometimes amplifying the very human conflicts it was created to manage.
Something to keep in mind. Vigilance is always needed, isn't it, to see the human dynamics working beneath the surface of the law.